2. Welcome back to WNST in Baltimore Positive. We are at Fadley's in Lexington Market. Commissioner Harrison made that crab cake disappear. I got to get me one after segment number 2 now.
It was absolutely excellent.
We're going to look at some oysters. We got special guests coming by. Delegate Sandy Rosenberg.
Listen, we got a Ravens game going on here. As we tape this, the Ravens are playing the Jets. I know they're going to win the Super Bowl. They might have already won the Super Bowl by the time you see this. But, I tell people when they come to town, I'll make sure you don't get a tourist crab cake, So I know what you do in New Orleans. Say we make sure you don't get tourist, crawfish. But this is the middle of Baltimore, Lexington Market, part of the area that you serve, protect, all of that in downtown. Right. And we have Nancy and Damie were here a little bit ago. Safety for all of our citizens, and we talked so much in the first episode about police and coming in and yourself. Technology. I hear about the blimps flying around, and I've heard you speak about that. But not only that, but the technology police officers wear and in the cars that protect them, but also protect the people to make sure our police officers are telling the truth when there's a piece of video.
Right.
And sometimes these things show up on Instagram and whatnot in somewhat of an embarrassing fashion, but it's always we would think to be truthful. But this thing in the sky and technology, tell me how that's going to serve to protect me a little bit better.
Well, we are really advanced in some areas, and we're really deficient in many areas. For example, when it comes to, I think you're talking about the aerial surveillance point.
Correct.
I've always argued that it is not the plane that is my concern. It is the way it was forecasted that the plane actually reduces murder. It is something that has never been tried in an American city. So as an academic, having taught at the college level, I know that that's not the appropriate way to do that. And
you're looking for some evidence-based research.
I am looking for evidence-based research because I was hired and brought to Baltimore because I was an evidence-based police chief. Now, that aside, there's so much technology that we need. For example, the main piece is a brand new records management system that we're working to buy right now. Because believe it or not, we're still handwriting police reports and turning them in today.
When's that going to change? When will that not happen any longer?
We had 2 vendors come in over the past 2 weeks. We have 2 more over the next 2 weeks to give us demonstrations on their product. And at the first part of the year, we'll select a vendor and buy a records management system. It'll take about a year to implement. But we have police cars with computers, but we can't fully utilize. Oh my God!
Here come oysters.
Oh my God, raw oysters. She made me forget about what I was saying. But back to that point, we have to get to the point where we can come out of a paper environment and move the department into a digital environment to catch up with other departments.
Who's doing it well? Who's doing it well?
20 years. Well, of course, you have cities like New York, who has probably unlimited funds, and large other cities that have a lot of wealth and a lot of resources, because the government really gives them a lot of assistance because they could be terrorist sites, and it's such a big economy that they have those things. It's not just New York. There are other cities that are very affluent and can afford that. We are working to now bring on something that other departments have been using for about 20 years. We have the money. We're doing it. I know the officers need it. But then we need other technology like synchronization of systems so that we don't have to log into 20 different databases, and our gun detection software is connected to the camera system. The camera system is connected to the computers in the cars. So synchronizing and coordinating that technology with the next evolution is what we really need. All of that is coming. It takes money. Some of it we have, some of it we don't. But then it becomes, before I can bring on a new records management system, I have to buy all new computers for everyone in the department, because the computers we have will not be able to handle this new technology. They're 7 and 8 years old. And so this is a wonderful time for us to ask for it, because we're demonstrating that we need it, and it will not get better for us until we actually get some of that, because and then when it comes to accountability, we can't audit in a paper environment. We can't audit documents and police reports, and we can't do the appropriate audits, and we can't appropriately see in real time what our people are doing to really manage them effectively. Number one, to prevent the bad acts from happening, and then to train and discipline when we find that they do. And so the technology upgrade is paramount for us to be able to move forward.
Well, at the same time you're moving forward on these technology advances, which is part of your crime plan, I know also that you've sort of dug down And you've made some administrative changes as well, trying to get more officers on the street and I guess backfill them with civilian personnel.
Right.
Talk a little bit about that effort and why it matters.
A couple of things. Very good. Civilianization and professionalization. Finding where officers are working that could be filled by civilian professional staff. You know, janitorial jobs, mechanical jobs, secretarial and clerical jobs.
In the past, they were police officers?
They were all police officers, and we hired civilians. But what happens is when cities, fall on economic downturns and they let civilians go, the police backfill the jobs just to continue the work. And so there are many jobs that police are doing that we want professional civilian staff and clerical staff to come in and do. We're doing that. The city council gave us 62 budgeted positions. We've hired over 50 people. We think there are another 100 or so jobs out there in the department that we could put civilians in and move police officers back into the field to do policing. And then just simple policy changes like the overtime policy and figuring out how to really manage the members of our department who are injured and have long-term illnesses. We've moved them to a unit right now for better synchronization of management, and just by doing that, 54 people have come back to work who are healthy, who weren't healthy before that policy but are now healthy and can come back to work. That's a force multiplier by putting more officers on the street. And then we were able to save over $1 million a pay cycle, every 2-week pay cycle, by managing just good management on simple policies about how we deploy officers and use overtime. We were spending $2.5 million every 2 weeks. We're down to like 1.3 every 2 weeks. So we're actually saving the department money with good management practices. Because there have not been good systems of accountability that we talked about in the previous segment, we weren't able to audit that and really look at that and really manage that well. Those are things we're doing now that's putting more cops on the street.
For those of you listening on the radio again and not on the podcast, we're here with Baltimore City Police Commissioner Michael Harrison, taking time out of his busy schedule. We've had some crab cakes. He's going to dive into some
I'm
oysters.
going to take one of these while we talk. I can't wait.
No,
He's
just
a happy
ahead.
man.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
It's lunchtime.
What?
You're running a city. We got to feed you for crying
There we
out
go.
loud.
Thank you. I say to my friends in the suburbs, you can see how happy the commissioner is. If you're in the suburbs and you have not been down to Baltimore City lately, come down to Fadley's. This place is hopping. It is incredible. Crab cakes, the fish, the oysters. Nestor,
We're usually not here this time of day. We usually do these at like 9 in the morning.
You like to pick your fish right up over there, right, and have them,
to be in here when it's swirling around and we're actually it's
actually fun.
I am in heaven.
Yeah.
Well, Commissioner, while you're in heaven, you touched on, I think, some of the most complicated issues in this crime report in fighting crime across the nation. And
if anybody had, I have this. I'm a citizen. I've been out to see Commissioner Harrison speak in my neighborhood, literally down on Cross Street, and I have a copy of this. But I don't know how many people have read it, but there's clearly a plan. We're not winging it here in Baltimore.
And it's comprehensive. And immediately upon release of that plan, I didn't find it surprising, and we'll have the FOP on to talk about their point of view as well. But it seems to me that police commissioners, police chiefs across the country always are sort of in this give and take with the FOP about what works, what's doable, how we can work together. And one of their criticisms right out of the gate of the crime plan was we're 500 officers short, and to implement the commissioner's crime plan, we're so understaffed, it's a non-starter from the beginning. Do I capture their argument correctly?
I think
I don't want to mischaracterize it.
I think you captured their argument correctly, although they presented the argument falsely.
Okay, tell us what that means.
Because the narrative of being 500 short, we're several hundred officers short. But being 500 officers short and having 500 fewer officers are two different things. We have 500 fewer officers. They are talking about a time when we were budgeted and staffed for 3,000 sworn members. We're budgeted and staffed for 2661, and we have been so for 6 years. We're not staffed for 3,000, and we have slightly.
So how many? So 2661 is a number. How many are actually? That's the real number right now.
Slightly under 2,400. Slightly under 2,500.
So we're looking at about 200 officers short at this point.
We're 200 officers short. We remember a time when we had 500 more officers.
Okay.
Big difference. There's a staffing plan that's going to be released tomorrow. We hired a professional consultant to do that, and the staffing plan is based on workload capacity, not geography. It's workload capacity. And so we agree that we're short. It's just the methodology of arriving at the right number that we differ. And I came up with the plan to instill confidence into the department and confidence in the community and to talk about the positive and where we are going. It is not my job to instill fear in our community and to talk about what we don't have and how bad it is, but rather to talk about where we want to go, which is what a plan is, where you want to go, not to talk about what we already know.
Will your plan work with 2661?
2661 is still an incredible short number. Without going into what the staffing plan from our private consultant will produce in the very near future, we agree that we're incredibly short. And the crime plan is a 5-year transformational plan to transform the department so we can comprehensively fix the department to do what it needs to do. There is a short-term plan of a deployment strategy that in the meantime we can have more effectiveness in the negatively impacted areas. We're still short, but being short doesn't mean to not try, and being short doesn't mean don't do it, and being short doesn't mean instilling fear. We still have to have people have confidence in us, and I think we said the same thing. They said they came out with the crime plan after mine, but it was really about saying how bad it is and what we don't have. I said what we want and where we want to go. We just said it in a different way.
Well, as a citizen, it unnerves me to see police officers fighting with each other or fighting with politicians. At some point there needs to be some togetherness here, right? Like for the whole community, for the new mayor, the next mayor, whether it's this mayor, right?
I do not believe that what you see from the FOP leadership is really the consensus of all the members of the department. That's the FOP leadership. As I go around to the department talking to officers, they give me a very positive signal, and it's much different. And while we hear that, that's the spokespersons speaking. I don't think that's the voice of the 2,500 members that we have.
Well, Commissioner, does this all tie as well to, obviously there's a recruitment component. We want to talk about that. But when I look at this whole discussion again, we've had some other experts on about crime, and there's a discussion about microzones and whether you call them microzones or targeted areas. There was some data that I think maybe you alluded to in the crime report as well, is that there were like 5% of the neighborhoods that were responsible for 30% of the gun crime. Is that an accurate statistic?
That's an accurate statistic over a 5-year window.
Right.
Over a 5-year window. And then we looked at what day of week and what time of day, so that we can precisely know, on average, what day of week and what time of day we're seeing these 3 categories of shootings, robberies, and murders. So the commanders can deploy their officers there to do specific things, like high levels of community engagement, high levels of enforcement when we see violations, and then training officers on how to do that enforcement and that engagement is very important. But that's an immediate solution to for a deployment strategy, while this is a 5-year comprehensive transformational plan to right course the department and get us all the resources we need. By saying we need these things is also saying we don't have them. So I put a plan out that said something almost the same way our labor group said it, but just in a different way.
Well, it seems that there's always this, there are several forces that always appear to collide and make police work difficult. And they're really wrapped up, to me, in the consent decree. This isn't your first time working through a consent decree, right. As we mentioned. You did it in New Orleans. If I were to break down what a consent decree says, it says that, look, we can't police a city or an area unless we have the trust of the people we're trying to protect. And what I was struck by when I looked at some of the research on this is that there's some hard data out of Milwaukee and other places that say that when folks distrust, or after incidences of police misuse like the Gun Trace Task Force, 911 calls go down. And that when 911 calls go down, people actually end up taking the law into their own hands and making the crime situation worse, so that there's no way to get to make a city safer unless we build the trust. I guess the big part of that question, so that without dragging it on, is, do police officers see it that way, or do they view the consent decree as asking them to do a job with their hands tied behind their back?
Well, they absolutely view, it's the latter. They absolutely view the consent decree, many of them, not all of them, view the consent decree as handcuffing and doing the job with their hands tied behind their back. It is a process and a tough communication strategy to get them to start seeing the benefits of the consent decree. And when that happens, they will begin to see higher levels of citizen satisfaction and more community input about crimes being committed. And they will see more resources come to bear within the police department that help them do their jobs better. At that point, they will begin to transform how they view the consent decree. You know, once again, I'm in the future looking back and have seen 7 years of being in a consent decree. Now, in the second year here in Baltimore, Baltimore's consent decree, we're still in the early phases where the cops really believe it's hurting them by tying their hands behind their back. It doesn't do that because the law has not changed. The law still supports us doing all the things that the law always told us we could do. There are some new policies and procedures that say here's the correct way to do it. And it slows us down to a degree because it's an administrative burden. We now, because we're in it, have to document and prove to the Department of Justice that we are doing the same job but in a constitutional way, which means we have to write everything, we have to document everything, we have to video everything, then we have to prove it to them, that they have to audit it to make sure it's being done and it's being done correctly. The way we do it, the way the law says we have to do it hasn't changed. The way we did it because of our practices only has to change. So, yes, what made us comfortable 2 years ago is uncomfortable now because we're having to figure out where if I used to do this way and I no longer can do it, then my hands are tied behind my back. No, we have to train them on the proper way to do it, which we're doing, but it takes time. But there will come a time in the near future where we will transcend the old way of thinking, and you'll see officers less apprehensive about the consent decree. They may not ever cheer it, but they will begin to appreciate what it brings.
How do you do that? As Nestor's big thing here on Baltimore Positive is he loves hearing about leadership, and he really is fascinated by leadership strategies. You're in charge of how many men and women?
It's over 3,000.
3,000.
It's
2,600.
2,500 sworn.
Right.
We're missing a little bit over 200 sworn, and I have about 500 civilians.
So how do you, as a leader, move this battleship? And I think we all respect I think we start from a premise that we all respect the men and women who protect us. We all believe they should do it the right way.
But as a citizen, I don't want a police officer who's armed tied behind his back.
Tied behind his back.
I need the criminals off the street.
So
because my wife needs to walk down and get her meds, right? You know,
perfect
literally.
way to say it, Nestor. How do we strike this balance? And as a leader, how do you convince the community that you hear them and you want police to do it the right way? And how do you say to your guys and gals on the beat, I got your back. As Nestor said, I want the bad guys off the street. I don't want you to do. It seems to me like it's really a tough job for a leader. How do you do it?
It is extremely tough because it's not just one thing at play. I know the right thing to do. I am an appointed chief, appointed and works at the pleasure of the mayor. There is a federal judge who oversees our consent decree, and then there are the elected leaders elected to represent the people of the city. In addition to the mayor. Then there are the people themselves, who have representation through neighborhood associations and all. And then there is what I know and what other chiefs know is just the right thing to do. And sometimes you get pulled in all of those directions, and sometimes you get pulled at the same time on the same issue in all of those directions. It becomes leadership because, as John Maxwell said, who was a foremost expert in leadership, everything rises and falls with leadership. And it is about having the will and capacity to make the unpopular decisions in the face of adversity, or people who want those decisions to go other ways, but making the decision because it is the right thing to do and the right decision to make. for the overall good of all of the people, not for any one person. That's number one. Number two, picking the right leadership team of people who have the will and capacity to lead, to be able to make unpopular decisions, and are willing to lose a few friends along the way because they're doing the right thing for the right reason. Decisions have to be made for the overall good of the agency and the city, not for any one person. And as long as we do that, we will overcome this, and we have to invest in our members. So if they're not good at their leadership skills, we have to invest to cultivate and develop and groom them to be the leaders we want them to be.
You know, that's so interesting. You just touched on that. It reminds me of a quote in a book by Jim Collins on Good to Great. I'm sure you're familiar with it. And he talks about a leader has to get the right people on the bus.
Yes.
Do you have the right people on the bus in Baltimore yet?
I think we have the right people on the bus. Occasionally the bus changes, and occasionally the people changes.
Right.
And so, yes, we built a great team, and we're working to invest to cultivate and develop and groom the leaders at the command level to make sure that they get better every single day. I have that in the plan. When I talk about professional development, I've already sent people to the top leadership schools in the country. We're working with some philanthropic dollars to send others to other schools across the country to develop them. So someday I can hand the keys of the Baltimore Police Department off to someone else who can take the keys and then take this department even further. But it becomes who has the will and capacity to lead. Leadership means making unpopular, tough decisions that affect some people negatively, but affect the majority of the people positively.
All right, we're going to take a break. Episode 2 with Police Commissioner Harrison here.
We're going to let the commissioner eat some more oysters?
We have crab cakes, oysters. I'm wondering what she's
going to
say. What is she going to send over here
If she sends over some alligator, I'll show you something. I don't know that's here yet.
Oysters, clam strips, calamari, mussels, and any kind of fish you possibly can want. Happy holidays to everybody. We got one more segment left. Crime reduction and departmental transformation plan. We're going to discuss this and probably some good seafood with Don Moeller. We're Fadley's in Lexington Market. He's Don. I'm Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and Baltimore Positive, and we never stop talking about ways to make Baltimore better.
Great.